Can't be able to tell you about his experiences here, but Carl is an experienced member of staff. Classics, how do you define your field?
I'm a classicist sometimes.
Classicist sometimes, okay? And the conversation today actually kind of links in with something we looked at yesterday with AI. So before we start, can everyone log in? Are you logged in?
Can you see the screen?
Yes, they'll see both screens.
Do both of them work?
Yeah, they're very good multi.
Excellent. So, hi, I'm Kyle. I am a classicist, ancient historian by background. I work mostly on the period from Alexander the Great into the Roman, so that's about 350 BC to about 60 AD. When Cleopatra dies, I stop being interested. Is the basic period of time that I work on, and mostly for my PhD, and most of the things I've published have been around either Alexander or the coinage of the kings that come after him. And Timmy asked me to do something methodological. I also conveniently got invited to give a talk in Oxford next month, hence the date of that, to talk about coinage in the Ashmolean Museum. And so I figured I'd do something about methodology for both of those talks and new things that are out there. So for me, my research world changed in the last 3-4 years, mostly because of a big project that's run through the American Numismatics Society, because they got a bunch of money from the US government to start putting coins online, which makes my life really, really easy in a way that didn't used to be. So coins tend to be held by either private collectors or in museums, in museums all around the world of any type. And so there's been a big project that includes the American Numismatic Society, big museums in Britain, big museums in Germany, big museums in Paris. So things like the British Museum, the French National Library, most of the German museums have all started putting all of their coinage online in a searchable format. And there are some big projects that are bringing that all together, which for me as a researcher, it's really, really nice because it means I don't have to go to all of the museums to go through sitting in all of their collections, although that's also kind of nice. Sitting in the coin room in the British Museum is really cool. And you can make appointments to do that, to see the actual coins. But it makes doing that research someplace like Swansea or living in Lampeter or anywhere in the world much, much easier. So these websites now exist, and this website brings in about 40,000 coins, which is a really big collection of objects in which you could analyze. And so what I wanted to start to do is ways in which I can play with an online database of information that's tied to my research. So the Hellenistic Royal Coinages project covers 4 empires. Effectively, it covers the empire that comes after Alexander in Greece and Macedon. The one that I normally work on, the Seleucids, which covers effectively what's modern Turkey out into modern Pakistan, and everything in between down to Egypt. The Egyptian Empire, and then an empire that emerges about midway through the period in Greco-Bactria, which is effectively Afghanistan, northwest Pakistan, and the Indo-Greek kings. So a bunch of museums had brought their coins in, and they built a lovely website in which you can do things like search for individual coins, and you can see nice things. So this is a coin of Demetrius. It's a gold coin, and you can click on the website, and it gives you a whole bunch of information about that individual coin. So they'll tell you what it is, when it was produced, how big it is, how much it was worth, who's on it, and it'll put a geographic bit on where the mint was. And it'll give you a little description as well and a reference to that. And then it'll show you examples of that coin. So where that coin sits in museums. So if you think of, say, a pound coin that was minted in the UK this year, they're all basically the same for that time. And people who study coins will say, okay, this is a coin from this year. It has these symbols on it, and we can interpret that information out of it. And we got a whole bunch of examples of these. So this database groups those things by type. Now, ancient coins, and one of the things you have with ancient coins, and you do want with coins, is that they're basically the same size and weight, which we still don't know how they did in antiquity. In the Greco-Roman world, Chinese coinage, which starts at about the same time, has a very different tradition. It casts coins, whereas Greek coins tend to be struck, and it's harder. Chinese coins are more consistent in size and weight than Greek coins are, because actually they're individually hand pounded, all of them, which leads to variations on them. So if you get something with a number of variations, you'll see, and we'll go through some of the examples of this, that there'll be slightly different weights or slightly different thicknesses. So these databases have started to exist, and they let you search by all sorts of really useful categories that would have made my PhD way faster had it existed when I did my PhD. Because I spent a whole lot of time going through the collections of a particular empire and looking at both portraits and the descriptions on them for my PhD, and categorizing them and then drawing interpretations out of them. So these types of databases are really useful, and a whole bunch of fields are developing them. I'm just using the one that I happen to know. It also does really fun things in the database. Like it allows you to search or generate a searchable map that includes the sort of instances of where the number of coins that have come out of individual mints. So you can see Alexandria, which is a foundation of Alexander, has a huge number of coins in that database. Antioch in Syria, sorry, that's Antioch in Syria, that's and that's current Macedon. So you can see where the big mints are that are producing coinage quite quickly. And that's searchable, and it distributes it. So that's a terrible picture, but I'll sort of show ways in which you can play with it. The other thing, and this is a sort of terribly uninteresting graph if you know nothing about coins, is you can pull out two really important features sort of instantly out of this website. One is you can pull out a distribution of their weight or a distribution of their diameter. So how big a coin is or how much it weighs, and track it through time. So the empire I tend to work on is the Seleucids, and they are around from 315 to 64 BC, when Ptolemy gets bored of when Pompey gets bored of them and just takes over the power. So I ask it to just give me what's the weight of one type of coin throughout the entire time period. Now it does some interesting things, bless you, where there are zeros in the data, which is the weird drops of them. Now, that would actually be really useful, and you can set that filter on a whole bunch of individual queries, but you can only produce it for that time. So other types of data like this, website series, you might generate it for things that you guys work on. The thing that made it really nice for me, and the Coin project does, is there's a lovely button on that webpage that says you can download it as a CSV file. So if it does that, it gives you just an Excel or just a normal table, which gives you, okay, what I searched for, the date range, and an average weight, which means if I didn't like that other table, which I didn't, I can plug it in to Excel, and I can make my own table, which will give me that same average weight. And like any table in Excel, I can then just go around and play with it. Now, unfortunately, when I did that, you can see that this table isn't very detailed. There's not a huge amount of that information. So it gives me the start date and the weight for every 5-year period, or the average weight for every 5-year period, but it doesn't tell me which coins go into that weight. It doesn't give me a lot to break down and do my own analysis of that. So it gives me a really useful overview, but not a way for me to sit around and play with it. So the really nice thing about this project is it's built on open data and open access. And it's got built in a couple of APIs that allow you to access the data. I am not a computer scientist, and that comes the really important thing for the rest of this talk. So an API is basically the best explanation that I understand, which I stole off a website, is basically an API is like a waiter for a computer. You ask it something, it goes to the server and tries to bring you back the data that you get, and you can go back and forth. My problem is I'm not very good at getting the data out of that, but the website gives you the ability to generate queries. So that if I wanted to know, say, the coins out of a particular mint, apparently what I should be able to do is to go to the back end of the website and put in I assume you say that is Sparkle, query. I spent a bunch of time fiddling with this and have failed miserably to generate any query except for the ones that have come out of the documentation that says you can do this query in the documentation. I haven't been able to manipulate them. Now, during COVID, I got really interested in the dashboards that like the NHS ran, and they ran them after Tableau. And I got stuck doing the one for the university, and I learned something called Power BI, which the university has a license for. And that allows you to plug in big data sets into something and visualize them. So I started fiddling around early in COVID when I was locked in my house with, can I get the information off of those websites into a way that I can use it and manipulate it for my research? And I spent some time trying to learn the queries, and I failed absolutely miserably. I got no usable queries, which made me quite depressed, and I went and I worked on some other projects at the time. Now, this year, and when I got the invite to Oxford, I went, wait a second, there's these new things like ChatGPT that should be able to generate information on this. So one of the things that I'm interested in is Seleucid coins tend to have things that either mint marks or monograms. So a couple of letters that are on the coin that we don't really understand what they are. We usually think they're the officials who are in charge of the coin production and that they're stamping them. And it would be really nice to see how you can map them, how you can look across how officials might move. And you can do that manually by looking at the coins individually, looking where the ones compare. But now I've got a data set, and I should be able to draw that type of stuff. So I put into ChatGPT, can you write me a query for this software bit for the monograms from the Mint of Antioch out of the type server? And it gave me something that looks like code. And it looks mostly like the code that looks like it's right. So I put it in, and it ran, which was good. Unfortunately, it gave me absolutely nothing, which really annoyed me because I thought I was going to save a huge amount of time to do this. I started to fiddle around with asking different questions. So, okay, I realized that, so the common name for the mint is Antioch, and it generated something here, so that it generated a code that says has mint, and it gave it ID that's numisma.org/Antioch. Now, the numismatics website has coded everything so they're individual web pages. And that's actually about, or that is in fact the setup of how the code website is structured. So I said, what happens if I put that into the URL? I put that in and went, oh, that doesn't exist. Okay, so maybe I can tweak it because actually Antioch has a full name in Greek, which is Antiochia on the Orontes. But I could Google it, and I got that Wisman names it as Antiochia _Syria. So ChatGPT, can you update it and say the mint is that one? I thought, okay, maybe this will work. The answer was again no. Disappointing. I still got nothing. Now, I'm fairly sure that if I understood Sparko well enough, I could get ChatGPT to generate the code if I was giving it the right prompts. However, if I knew Sparko well enough, I wouldn't be needing ChatGPT because I just generate those prompts by myself. So at that point, I gave up, and I just tried to decide something else. And at this point, I was going around the website and went, okay, there's another way to get the data. It allows me to bulk download stuff. So on the website, it's got a typology that's downloadable. It's got a database of places that are GIS or that are latitude longitudinally linked. And it's got dumps of all of the museum data. So you can see, so there's the type, so Antigone codes online, and it'll say the types on a whole bunch of databases for different types of coins that are there, and then I could download them. So I dutifully downloaded them all. And you can do the same, and then I imported them into Power BI, and that worked. So it gives you a whole bunch of tables, and I could expand all of the tables out in Power BI by touching that button, which is really useful. And I got actually, I got the information that I wanted. So it gave me the types, the name, how they're linked, what size they were, what material they were, who was in charge of it, and all of the information that I wanted. But that only gave me that sort of abstract type. So, i.e., this is a coin of Queen Elizabeth II from 2021. And this is what's on the front and on the back. Not all of those individual examples of the coins. So I went back to the website, and I downloaded more information. Because the website can take you to it. Go to it has dumps from a whole bunch of museums. So the American Numismatic Society, the Bibliothèque Nationale de France, the numismatic collection in Amsterdam, the Fitzwilliam, a whole bunch of universities. I just got that data dump. So I downloaded all of them, which is a couple million items. I then tried to put it into my computer. Yeah, my computer did not handle that. It wasted about 7 or 8 hours in which I got it all to look like it worked, and then it tried to load, and then it froze for 4 hours, and then it crashed and deleted everything that I had done. Save your work. Save your work halfway through. In fairness, I couldn't save because it needed to apply all of the changes, which is why I didn't save. But then I gave up and I did something else that evening. Then I decided, okay, I probably don't need all of the coins from all of them for this to work. So the useful thing here is there are about 40,000 coins in the Hellenistic project. So the ANS database has 70,000. The Bibliothèque Nationale has 40,000. So I went, oh, okay, maybe I don't need all of these. I do want the ANS one because I know that's where the bulk of the coins are. Unfortunately, data labeling is really, really important. So if you scroll over these will give you pop-ups, and that will give you something like page 3. Terrible data labeling. The French library is really nice. So it goes BNF BIGR, which is the back, which is one of the databases. that one is the Hellenistic Royal Coinages database. Oh wait, I just need to download that one rather than all of them. And then I ignored most of the German museums. So I decided, so that I don't break my computer, I downloaded the American Numismatic Society, the right one out of the French one, the British Museum, and because I was going to Oxford, the ones out of the Ashmolean Museum. And that gave me about 35,000 coins. So roughly 85% of the database. And mostly I was doing this as a test case to see if all of this would work. And that loaded into my computer. And my computer is literally this laptop. So it's not a supercomputer. But it does effectively work. So I've done that, and I pulled them all in. And then I started to just check things. So coin denominations, so pennies, I'm going to say quarters because my brain has gone to Americans, 50p pieces, shillings, those types of things work in the ancient world as well. So I pulled them out and I went, it's given me that URL type ID. Power BI gives you a fairly easy thing that I can just do. Okay, like in Excel, transform the cell, make one that chops up everything after. I think I did it by characters because I can count it's 28 characters there, and it will just give me the names of them. And then I could link all of those data sets together. So Power BI says, okay, if you've got a field that is the same, just pull them together and the data set will link, and it forms a relational database, which is really, really helpful. So I linked things like the denomination. So I pulled that out and I tidied up the name, and I linked it in to the denomination of that core type series. And then I did the same thing for the mint location. So I've got a GIS located mint. I did it for the description of the front, the back, who produced it, metal, and the region. And then having downloaded all of the coins out of the other data sets, I linked that in as well. And so then I plugged it into Power BI. And that meant I could start to pull out the data. So the other really fun thing about Power BI I've discovered now is when it's web-based, once you upload it, you can embed it in PowerPoint. So this is live data in PowerPoint. So if I do that, it will zoom into my mint, and it will tell me the information that I wanted. So I've plugged in the material, and in some ways here I've been able to replicate lots of what that website does. So as I said, that website could give me, okay, where's a mint location? I could generate that map, or I could browse coins. So I'm interested, so let's get out of Babylon. I'm interested in, let's say, the distribution of the coins in a particular museum, which I couldn't easily do on the website because I was interested in going to Oxford. I put in a filter that goes, I've put it out of the collections, and now I can look at what the coins are out of the collections in the Ashmolean Museum, which means when I was trying to prep my talk for the Ashmolean, I was looking for something interesting to say out of the Ashmolean coins. And I don't get to go to the coin because it's closed for the day. So I'm going to do this instead. But it gave me a way in to go, actually, I need to narrow this collection down within my subset. So by setting up categories that I was interested in, I can manipulate the data to do that. The other things that I could play around with were I wanted to know that distribution of the metals for the coinage. So see if I can figure out that. So I was interested in, let's say, the distribution between silver, gold, or bronze coinage. So what I did was, like in Excel, you can color code labels. So all of the silver coins are grayish, the bronze ones are sort of orangish, and the gold ones are sort of gold color. So I can really now easily see that actually most of the coins in the Ashmolean Museum are silver. So I can start looking down at what am I looking at. Now, I also decided one of the things that I'm interested in doing is, or might be interested in doing, is looking at their weight and their diameter. So that's sort of core features of a coin. But how many coins make that up? Just to see if I could test to see the data that I'm getting across out of generating on the web versus the data I've downloaded is accurate. So I've got the individual numbers as well on the website on the page, just so that I can look at them and I can do filtering things out as appropriate. So let's say I wanted to say, let's look at this the coins that are in the silver coins in Babylon in the Ashmolean Museum. So I decided, okay, there's Babylon, there's 14. In my collection, there are 1,410 coins that were produced in Babylon, and they were produced by under 3 different kings. So Alexander the Great, his brother Philip, and his successor Seleucus. I know most of these coins are of Alexander, and there's a tiny number at the Mint of Babylon. And I could also see what that distribution is. So almost all of them are tetradrachmas, which is 4 of a drachma. And I'll get a little bit into prices later. And when those coins were started to being produced and when those coins were stopped being produced. But one of the cool things that you could see on the website was, okay, I want the examples of the coins. But of course, I could also, because that is there, I could bring in the data. And Power BI gave me a nice thing. I learned that I can categorize images. So because everything's a URL, I've rebuilt effectively that website, but I've distributed it in a way that's useful for me to do the queries that I'm interested in. So here are all of the examples with some of their weights and their dimensions and the pictures that are on the website. Now, nicely, the American Numismatic Society gives you a link to the front and the back of the coin. The British Museum doesn't. It puts them all in one image and small. But it does also, it gives me a link so I can click on the museum and it'll take me to the museum website, because that's sort of hard-coded into that core open access database. And so much of this is so much easier in my life by the development of big open access products. When I did my PhD, I did this by going to coin rooms and going through the manual books, and it was a joy. I would do it differently, and I might be able to come to some different conclusions than I did otherwise. So the other thing that I'm able to start fiddling around and doing is to go back to those queries that I was able to run on the website. So that was that is weight distribution of the tetragrams, so 4 grams across time. And you can see when I put it into Excel, Excel takes out the zeros, which the website didn't. So I could do that fairly straightforwardly in Power BI, because I've got it linked to a date, I've got it linked to a mint, and I've got it linked to the kings. Unfortunately, they're not the same. Now, some of this I think is due to I'm missing about 10,000 coins. And I think the online database, and I need to go through and check this, is I think it throws out things that are anomalous. So, and I'll show you how, I'll go through some of the ways that actually exploring the data sets that I've got is really useful, because it will show up things in the open data set that you wouldn't otherwise see. So we'll come back to some of these peaks and troughs. The other thing is the data set has dynasties set up, and the data set that I've derived doesn't have a dynasty. So what I've done is I've selected all of the kings in the dynasty. I might have missed some. Or it might include some small collections that I don't have that throughout the average. The other thing that would be really useful to be able to do is a coin is an object and weight is tied both to diameter, isn't it? So I can really easily in Power BI go, I need to look at the map of weight and diameter in the same thing. I want to see if the diameter fluctuates as the weight fluctuates, or if there are other fluctuations. And for the most part, they do. But there are some interesting ones where that fluctuation doesn't match. And that gives me ways to explore the data. So this is giving me questions that I could go into that I couldn't get without the data set. Now, it's sort of possible to do this out of the queries out of the website. So I could go through and I could do the same thing I did for weight, and I could download the data and put either there or put it in Excel. But what I couldn't do, or at least I couldn't figure out how to do out of the website, is do this at the same time. I could run a website query on diameter and I could run a website query on weight, but I couldn't run a website query to pull both variables out. That being said, because I could download the Excel file, I've got two Excel files. I can copy and paste a column across, and I can stick them together. And you can see there's the same anomaly, and something weird happens in about 2:15. Now, other things I can do, because I've got a linked data set. I'm interested. Let me see the mints. Okay, I can throw a map on. I've got the latitude and longitude of every coin mint in there, so I can put that onto my lovely database page. The other thing that I'd like to be able to do is to explore the individual coins. So I can copy and paste that other one that I made, and I've got all my individual coins on that page. And then finally, I'd like to just see the average weight for the kings. So if I fiddle with this and I pick, let's say, one of these troughs, it will just bring up the individual coins. I'll have to do this to find the same one. Actually, let's pick that high coin. You can see all of the diameters go on the screen. Now I spent a bunch of time just fiddling around with the data. And one of the things I noticed is if I go through and I found this coin in Babylon, and its weight is recorded as 4. Now, most of these coins are between 16 and 18. So either this coin is miscategorized in the data, so it's either miscalculated, or somebody's got the attribution wrong. So given that it looks like this, it is probably not a tetradrachm, it's probably a drachma, because it's about a quarter of the weight that you're expecting. So now I've seen, by pulling the things together and scrolling through, I can start to identify, actually this coin is misidentified, this one is misidentified. And in doing the same type of thing, I found another coin, which is clearly just a typo. Its diameter is 277 rather than 27.7. So one of the ways that the data that's being pulled out is odd and causing some of these peaks is misattribution on the website. And so this gives me a way to verify the data before I'm pulling out any conclusions. And that was much harder with just pulling out the sort of overview data. And it allows me to go through and sort of check on an individual basis when I'm doing my data. Does this make sense? Does this make sense? And what are where are the potential errors? Now, the other thing that playing around and pulling stuff into a big data set that allows you to connect data sets means is if there are other data sets that other people haven't thought of connecting, you can do new stuff. So one of the things that exists for Greco-Roman antiquity, or not really Greco-Roman antiquity, but Babylonian antiquity, is this wonderfully weird set of tablets called the Babylonian Astronomical Diaries. And they run from about 500 AD, or 500 BC to about 200 AD. And they're the nightly observations of the Babylonian priests of the sky. hence the astronomical diaries. But they also record a whole bunch of stuff in there, like the price of barley, the price of dates, the price of sesame seeds, weird omens, when kings die. But you've got effectively monthly, daily price records for a couple hundred years in a region that we know about, and I've got coins on. And a wonderful person, Bert van der Speck, in I think he's in Amsterdam, has put that into an open access Excel file, which I can go to his commodity prices in Babylon from 385 to 61 BC, the period I happen to be interested in, and download that Excel file. That Excel file has that information in years. I've got years on my coins, and I can filter out Babylon. So one of the things that he says is that the Babylonians seem to be using coinage not as coinage, but as bullion. So they're using it basically as silver, which they then need to reweigh to do the exchange. So basically, coin is bits of silver, and we don't care that it's a coin. The interesting thing is they do seem to occasionally report it in shekels, except that, which is the old Babylonian measurement and the coinage that the Persians used, but that the Greeks don't use. But they use some that, but a stater, but they seem to translate that as stater, which is also a coin they don't seem to use. But that seems to be equivalent to a tetragram, which weighs about 17 grams. So that coinage that I was pulling out. So and they do things like X shekels in the state of Alexander, and so that might give you an exchange rate. So what I did was I pulled that table in, and I did something like, well, I can do. It divides the table divides it into the grams of silver per 1,000 liters of material. So I pulled up barley and press. And went, well, I can divide the grams of silver by the average weight of all of the tetragrams that I have in the database for that region, which I can filter. And I can see how the price fluctuates and how many coins I would need over time. And then I can go, does the weight change in that period? And is there some coordination between the weight change and the amount of price fluctuation? So can I use this as a proxy measure for inflation? This took me about 30 minutes, which would have taken me 10 years ago, months. And I could go, well, actually, so during the period where I brought the price data, the weight doesn't hugely fluctuate in those regional quantities, but the price fluctuates hugely. So we're not looking at size of coin changes, weight of coin changes. So you see a little bit of an uptick here, and actually you see an uptick in prices here as well in the 150s. That's sort of been well studied. There's a good study from Temin at MIT on this. But the other price fluctuations seem to be tied to something else other than coinage. So all of the analysis that you see is around things like fighting in and around Babylon. So there's a major civil war here. And that's probably the things that driving battle prices here. Also, you get things like weather effects. But so this gives me ways in which I can tie, here I've done silver coinage, but one of the other things that I could do, and one of the things that's really, really complicated in working out in antiquity, is the structural relationship between bronze coinage and silver coinage and the price relationship. So usually we assume a ratio of, what's it, I think it's 16 to 1. And the same ratio between silver and how do they, without the records, how do we reconstruct how they're moving between metals? So this gives me a way to go, actually, can I plug in the bronze coinage? Can I look at different variations in sizes of bronze coinage, which is far more regionally variable, and do that? I haven't done that yet because this took me all of Saturday. It'll probably be my next step to do that. But it allows me to go, actually, now I've got two data sets that were previously entirely independent, but I've got, and I can go, ooh, I can fiddle around and see what interesting questions I can start to ask out of the data. The other thing that I found is really fun in Power BI that I haven't done is it has some built-in AI. So one of the things that I could do, so it has a little option that you put in, ask a question about your data. And it'll do. So give me what is the average weight of a Babylonian text string? There we go. I didn't have to do anything to do that. So some of this, and the things I haven't fully gone through and set up the database in the way that I'd like it. But when you know what your fields are and you know what your information is, if you put in appropriate keywords, it'll help your searching. So Power BI basically, you're pulling Excel tables together and it allows you to identify keywords. Now, some of the things that I've seen really people creative in searching in few forms to fiddle this is what they've done is you can load in, if you pay for the version of ChatGPT has an API that you can connect to PowerPoint to look at my data, summarize and add keywords to, and then to update them. This is way beyond my abilities. But if you can do that, you're going to start to build keywords, which will then allow you to have a really nicely identified structure of your data that then you can do searches in ways that you might not otherwise understand. So it's those using the sets of tools that might be available in any given field to play around with open data opens up new ways to play with the data that people I think haven't even started to explore yet. And that's how it becomes much easier to start to push research forward. And you can use that to go, actually, this is an interesting question that I want to ask. And for me, my research has always come out of here's a data set that I have. What doesn't make sense? Okay, that doesn't make sense. How do I explain what doesn't make sense in this? Have I asked the right questions? And pulling the data together in ways that I can go, oh, that's interesting. Does that make sense? Oh, the answer is easy because actually what's happened is they haven't put the data in right. Or, okay, there's something here that's not quite explainable. Okay, what are the possible explanations? What else do I know? What's all of that contextual knowledge that I have that I can pull it in? So that was probably shorter than I wanted, but that was my sort of fiddling around with open AI features, pulling data sets together to start to ask different research questions. And I'm sure the more that I play with this, the different questions I can start to ask. So there are whole sorts of things that I haven't done. So all of the coins have descriptions of what's on them. And one of the things that I'm really interested in playing with is things that you can do like semantic filters, which I don't really understand, but things that like marketing people do for, what is it? It's a word for it, where you sentiment analysis. But a sentiment analysis is scanning through big bits of text for words. So if I can identify types of things, can I run sentiment analysis on patterns in coin descriptions? And can I see what that is? And will that be different than people having looked at it traditionally? So I've read and looked at 40 some odd thousand coins in my life. I have a very clear idea of what I think a Seleucid coin is. I can tell you what deities look like. But have people gone through and done that? How much does AI analysis of the images do? I've not played anywhere around with those AI tools of I've got 70,000 or you've got 40,000 coins. If you throw them into AI, will it come to the same conclusions that people have in categorizing them? So one of the things that is interesting in studying Coinage, and I've sort of glossed over it, is so we've assigned all of these coins to a mint. I'll pull this. Okay. Let's pull. Let's pull that one out. So lovely coin, that's what Alexander Ballas? No, Python. Okay. So this is a Seleucid usurper. We've identified it on the basis of the name. So that's got the name. So that's easy. How do I know where it's produced? Basically, for the last 200 years, people have been looking at, oh, those are the monograms that I talked about. Those look like the coins. Those are monograms that are used there, there, and there. Some of the fine spots are around that region, so that's how we identify that. So all of that's been done by humans for the last 200 years. How much does pulling that information out, throwing it through to resort it, doing things like actually they're in the same size and the same shape. Do I look for anomalies out of that to look for misattributions? And people, that's something that happens now by scholars. So people will say, actually, these coins aren't in this group. They're here. Now Tryphon doesn't live very long in a fairly limited place. He controls basically Antioch for about a year and a half. So he's not going to be producing stuff elsewhere. We know that. But some things like, if I went to the Bactrian coinage, one of the things that they've refused to do, Bactria is fascinating. We have a huge amount of really, really, really great coins. The 99% about what we know about these kings comes from these coins entirely. There's maybe a page worth of text that refers to them in existence, and they produce some of the prettiest coins humanly possible in really high value metal. But all of where they come out of, all of how they're linked, all of it is entirely based on coin analysis by individuals. So doing lots of that pattern recognition, all of that stuff that humans are really good at, but computers are also becoming increasingly good at, might lead to new discoveries about this. So you can see Bactrian and Nemean coinage, Diodotus the first and Diodotus the second. Doesn't really help that the father and son have the same name. And on the coin is just Diodotus. But this one. So Antiochus Nicator is a king who 20 years ago no one thought existed, and no one's still sure if it exists. So there's an argument in scholarship. A guy named Jens Jacobsen in Norway decided that looking at this coinage, so the Seleucid king for whom Bactria revolts from is named Antiochus. And he produces the coinage that has what becomes the Diodotic type with a portrait that doesn't quite look like Antiochus in the name of Antiochus. And so what people normally did was went, well, we think it's probably the next king Diodotus. He's still producing coinage in the name of the last king, but he's starting to put his own stamp on it. But the portraits don't match, and that's an iffy thing. So all of these portraits are carved in an intaglio die that we then smash them. So they're hand carved. So variation in portraiture is one of the ways you identify mints. But Jens went, well, what if there's a king named Antiochus who produced all of this coinage, and Diodotus is the next one that produces it? Now, like I said, there was almost no text. There is a paragraph in Polybius when Antiochus III, a generation later, comes to Diodotus's descendant, and he basically goes, it wasn't my family that rebelled from you guys. Somebody else did, and we kicked them out. So therefore, it's not our fault. We were independent already. So the reading back in this was Antiochus actually an individual who we have no other record for, and that's the rebel king in between. But doing an analysis through a computer-aided imagery of all of this might show up. Actually, what you're seeing is stylings, carvers, the same. So all of that stuff that might not be readily available to the human eye might be available. So it makes all sorts of interesting questions. Okay. So that's it for me. Happy to take any questions.
Everyone's here on the forefront. In your field, do you think this technology will push forward back to the next wave? This is AI.
I think so. So I'm really interested to see. I'm going to present this in Oxford next month to the Royal Numismatic Society. It'll be very interesting what the reaction there is to it. But you can clearly see that governments are putting money. The American government has spent a fair amount of money on the project to bring all of this together. That there's a fair amount of building these open access data sets. And they're clearly doing that with the expectation that people are going to use them and start to use the tools that are generated out of that. So I clearly think that's the direction that, as a humanities, that integration between tech and the things that people have just done by observation for a long time have been now. And classics might be a field that you think of as we study stuff. We also seem to be very systematic, which leads itself very well into computer bits, even in language. So some fields where actually we're going to categorize everything. One of the first major projects in classics in the late 19th century Germany was we're going to catalog the word frequency of every word in Homer. Which you can see now, with you've got your texts, you can plug that into a computer and you can do all sorts of stuff that was hugely manual to do. And that type, having that background of that pulling structured data information together will make humanities research really different.
Has anything about that something didn't expect the next we still think about the stages where
For this is for me very much in the development stages where so there was Oxford and the Bibliothèque Nationale did the Macedonian version of this, and they had a conference in 2017, 18, which published sort of this is how we're starting to explore this, and that was for me, that went okay, what's the next step for me? What's the next step? And I think people are doing that bit of okay, can I pull this together in different ways? I will say as a classicist, the downside of this is people in universities have been being classicists and arguing about breaking Roman text for the last 200 years, which makes it saying something new fairly hard. But that is also where I think this type of stuff will make asking different questions, because it would be okay, numismatists do it and pull together these huge data sets in projects that take 10, 15 years to look at all of the production of a mint was a project of 50 years or 20 years work for an individual. But actually, if it's all in a data set, it's a 20-minute project. And that means you need to start asking different questions out of that. I'm not quite sure people know until people start to use and get comfortable. I think the questions, we'll try and ask the same questions, build the data sets, and then go, okay, what do we do? How do we fiddle with this next? And there are all sorts of ways in which The next phase for me is that interaction with the public and getting this out there and pulling stuff together that is yeah, no, is doing the things like the getting these images done around sites, which is that real integration of knowledge about antiquity, information, graphic imagery, possibilities of the web. So this takes you through Persepolis, so the Persian royal city, in insane detail. And to me, this is the next, both this opens up a whole host of different research questions. So one of the things that's, I have a PhD student who's working on sensory experience and landscape in antiquity. And that was a major development in archaeology. But that involves going to ancient sites and walking around. How much does things like VR rooms, how much does that stuff start to come in when you've got that ability to explore and build things that go, oh, I can go back and forth and go, this looks like this. What does that do to our envisioning of experience of antiquity, and what questions does that allow us to ask in a different way? Yeah. Yeah, we could develop. It could be really interesting. I was in Germany at the start of the year, and the Glyptotek Museum, which is one of the museums, had an exhibition on light in Pompeii, and effectively on oil lamps, which was really interesting because you think of an enclosed room, and we now think about light in a really different way because of electrification. At the end of the exhibition, they had a VR room in which you could go into a room, put a VR headset on, and be in a room that was lit as if you were in Pompeii only with oil lamps, without having to burn oil lamps, keep them running, terracotta bits. And that gives a very different sense than walking around Pompeii or how you imagine seeing them. Because you've got these things can't exist, or can't exist in the same way. So and that changes how you might interact with that. So that type of stuff, and the more information you pull out of that makes all of that more real.
Okay, found in the area, you always is second, and then the same thought, why wasn't your into pointing out something? It goes to it, this is the goes to find out I'm interested in nothing else. I don't come out and that's nothing to do.
That's a really big question. As a classicist, we started with text. It was I have 3 sentences. That war might exist. Yeah. Yeah.
What we when we get the content, that's the thing to set. What would be a normal amount of the culture also in century see about the data.
I think for this, I think I'd get asked questions, and for me, I'd pull in all of those points. But I also know a huge amount of points are in private collections. And that's a huge data set that doesn't exist at all in this, and how much of that is skewed. And how much of that is skewed because the ones that are in private collections happen to be the really nice, pretty ones that happen to be better weighted, better cast. So what we're looking at is the stuff that people haven't bought. Is a really interesting question. For me, there's also another project that I thought of coming out of this, which is how to get private collectors to catalog their own collections in a way that becomes accessible into this. And actually, you could probably, on the basis of the ontology that's set up behind this, build an app that allows somebody to take a picture of the coin that they've bought, help filter it, identify it, dump it someplace, even if it names it as their sign-in, name it as their collection. It then imports into those databases, and suddenly you've built a citizen science project as well. There's all sorts of, and that becomes a hugely valuable project. So that doesn't answer your data question.
No, that's not because it is not one person.
Yeah.
Sometimes that's so many actions.
I always think I could not function as a modern historian. For me, I have read every text that exists on this list from antiquity. I did that in 6 months. I could not read every text that existed for last week if I had them in 100 years. That data, for me as a classicist, my data sets are always fairly limited.
You think, you said earlier that when you were doing your PhD, you had to go through everything physically. You think that alone is an arbiter of how much data you now use? So if you were supervising a student doing your PhD now, would you be saying, oh, you haven't got enough data, you haven't got enough data, simply because it's available and manageable by another means than time?
True. I've been having this discussion with a PhD student now who's working on cylinder seals in Cyprus. And he started right before COVID, and his plan actually for his second year, which happened to be 2020, was to go to the museums to look at the objects in Cyprus. That proved not possible. So what he's had to do is pull things out of publications, but we know there are gaps in them. And actually what we've said is, actually, this is the data set you've been able to collect in the time when it is your PhD. Say that's acceptable, so you know your gaps, know what gaps might be there, acknowledge them and say, these are the conclusions I can draw out of that.
So you're really saying that, the amount of data you use is not necessarily that important. It's admitting what you've used, what you get from it, and what you haven't got. And so therefore your assumptions may well be,
Limited by,
debatable or limited by the amount of data.
yeah. And it's understanding where some of those limits are. If you're doing a survey and